Hello, welcome to the Best Overall Show. My name is Jim, your host. I'm joined today by David Koska and
Hey!
special guest John Weyermuller. Right? Did I say that right?
There you go. You got it.
I've been practicing all week. I was like, okay, I gotta get this right.
Better than Jason Horn. He murders it every time he says it.
Yeah. So I was like, okay, David. For some reason, you're really small, so I'm gonna make you bigger.
It's okay. I'm okay.
Yeah. All right. Perfect.
Tiny presence, loud voice. It's okay. I
Fuck
can.
you, so you can't get smaller. All right. Yeah, there we go. So on today's show, so for those of you that are just tuning in for the first time, best overall show. The theme of the show basically is we kind of talk about just about everything in the hobby. We wanted to bring John on this week to specifically talk about himself because I think a lot of times with like 40K, like the. Am I quiet? I'm always quiet. How's that? Is that better? Is that too loud?
You had the voice of an angel.
Anyways, I think a lot of times the focus is always on the players and like the tournament winners and stuff like that. So one of the things that we really want to do on this show is kind of focus and kind of celebrate everyone that's involved in the community. And also we wanted to bring John on to kind of have a really good discussion around judging and kind of just learn more about like how he got into judging. And I think that's something that we're going to discuss. So just kind of getting started. I guess the first thing I just want to first thing we're going to talk about is just kind of weekly news. So, first topic I wanted to kind of start us off on is the new Drakari rules, and basically what you guys are thinking about the new Drakari rules as far as the main discussion is around whether we think there's power creep happening in the game, and I know there's been lots of conversation around basically like Death Guard felt like a little bit stronger than Necrons and Space Marines, and then obviously Drakari are out now, and Dark Angels. These have kind of been the newest books. So, what is your guys' thoughts on the kind of direction of kind of the codexes and where the game's going in that sense?
John, you want to take this one first?
Yeah, sure.
Honorary first guest.
Awesome. Yeah. I appreciate it. I like being your first guest. That's quite the honor. So as far as codex creep goes, I have a hard time understanding where the meta is at because there's not a whole lot going on. you know.
Yeah.
So without a lot of large events, without a lot of events that are spread out in multiple places, it's difficult to tell exactly what's happening. Although I will say that for Drakari, at least everybody's gonna be smashing the buy button on those Hellions, right? Like those just seem really good. However, I think with Death Guard and even like Deathwing, people are like, these things are so great, these things are so overpowered, but like you're not seeing that translate into the few event results that we see, right? So like I made this point today actually in I used to, prior to COVID, write a weekly article for Frontline Gaming for the ITC. I think I've interviewed Jim. I've interviewed you a couple times, right? During the 2019 season, the 2020 season. No, not 2020. Nobody played in 2020. Um, and so in there, I was discussing today how it's hard without a lot of events happening to really know what the meta is actually like. I think there's two major events where orcs came in first and second, right? So and nobody was talking about orcs. Like
No, orcs is the new meta, man.
Right, apparently. And then we have a guy locally, Danny, who plays with us on TFG Radio, and he's playing Demacarans, and he was playing 3 Demacarans at the beginning of ninth before like John Lennon took him and won that GT in Florida or wherever it was. So I think that there's a lot of stuff people are missing. So I don't know how much codex creep is occurring. I'm sure it's like codex creep is codex creep that happens, no matter what edition you're playing, what game system you're playing. But I don't think it's as bad yet. But then it is hard to tell. So I think it's sort of like a double-edged sword at this point. We don't really know, but it probably is happening. It's a little bit of like Schrodinger's beta.
Sorry, just give me one sec. I'm just having some weird technical difficulties.
Sure.
Where basically I have 2 versions of Costco on the screen, which is weird, and I have no Johns on the screen, which is very weird.
Whoa,
Here, look at
double
that.
the
There we go.
Oh! Oh, sorry.
Okay.
I'm looking at the old feed.
And then just one sec. I'm just having a weird audio issue because now,
No.
now for some reason, John is like double echoing. Guests. See, this is why I'm not good at streaming.
Look at
So
my look at my
there's an
better at
echo.
than I better at than I am.
There's an echo for some reason, but only when David. Sorry, David, say something.
I am talking
Yeah,
with the word speak.
there's an echo.
Is that me?
Yeah, I don't know how to fix
I
it.
have everything muted and I have headphones on.
I know, but it's Is the echo gone? Yeah, it's the echo's back. God damn it.
I can't hear myself.
Why is that one? Let me just see here. Okay, try talking now.
Do you want me to talk about my hot take on the new hotness that is Dark Eldar, I guess? Because we can still talk about it. I guess I like the new Dark Eldar book. I think it's very interesting to see that like witches are getting a lot more love. I think the different covens are a little more. I think a lot of people were like, "Oh, it's like a lot of the same," but I still see there's a lot of differences. I like a lot of the new like warlord traits, a lot of the new creating like the chapter master variants are like at 2,000 points. You can easily just like I feel like you can have like all three of those in a real space attachment. It gives you a lot of nice like variety. I think just because ninth, in my opinion, now is a much more like objective holding flexibility kind of game again, and I think those new warlord traits and those new abilities will be really good. Having a Harmonculus that comes back to life on a 2-up is super helpful. Um, having a succubus that can consolidate out of combat is really nice considering nowadays like things that fall back can't do much of anything, and if they can, it's like you have to use like 2 CP to do it. So like being able to just like hop out of combat and just function is like really good. And not to mention just being able to get like Hackatrix Blood Brides and the Highborn and the new what are the new racks called?
Oh yeah, I don't know what they renamed them to.
Super racks? Let's call them super racks.
Super racks.
+1 leadership, plus it's like all of them are only +2 points per model, and they get a lot of great benefits. Like
they're like Snyder cut racks.
Finally.
Okay, I think the audio's working.
We trolled GW enough they finally released them. Yes.
Do we have a hashtag campaign? I missed it.
We can start it now.
Yeah, sorry about that, guys. I'm apparently not very good at technology, and I like cloned the audio, so it was like doubling the feed for some reason.
It happens.
Skype is very annoying.
Yeah.
So just let me know in the chat if you guys can't hear properly. All right. Okay. Sorry. Now I've lost my train of thought and I'm rattled. So give me 1 second. All right.
Talking about Dark Eldar, Jim.
Yeah. I was like, I have so much to talk about Dark Eldar, and now I've like lost my train of thought. So, overall, do you guys feel like this is a trend that we're going to continue to see? And I know we haven't really had a meta per se, but does it concern either of you that like I don't know, it seems like there is a very distinct power creep as far as I'm concerned, and although the meta is not quite established, I guess I think this happens every edition where the first few books seem really good. Like this happened when Space Marines were released at the start of 8th edition, and then very quickly were overshadowed by later books. And Death Guard, Space Marines. Wow, Space Marines and Death Guard were some of the first 2 books in 8th edition too. That's really interesting. So do you think that's something that we're going to see moving forward? Do you think there's going to see this kind of gradual creep, or do you think are you worried about that? I guess is my question.
I generally worry less about creep and rules, and I worry more about rules bloat. Right. That's probably because I have to make a lot of judge calls at LVO every year. So my thought process is more like, okay, how much are you going to bloat the game with rules that contradict or overlap? Whereas codex creep, I don't know. I've been playing so long, I think I just accept that as reality at this point. That like the new codex is probably going to be better than the last one. So, I mean, what can I do about it? But yeah, I think that. So I think you were saying, David, you like the mechanic that they can fall back out of combat, right, and still like
Mm-hmm.
interact, right? I think it was the succubus. So anything that breaks a core rule legally is pretty powerful, right? And so I worry when it comes to codex creep about having too many units per codex that can break a core rule.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So that's the thing I worry about, Jim. In terms of codex creep, I worry about too many units per codex that can break core rules and cause interaction issues.
Yeah, and what are your, like, I've obviously, the release schedule's been quite all over with, like, obviously the pandemic causing lots of issues, but I bought my Death Guard book in this, I think, January, and the Drukhari players are buying 2 books at the same time. Crazy enough, the Cult of Strife book, or the new book, is more expensive than a codex. It's 70, like in Canada, it's $70 Canadian versus 60 for the codex.
Dude, yeah, that Charodon book is fucking stupid pricey.
Yeah. And so there's, there's like, obviously it's almost like you're getting like day one, DLC here. And I guess I guess.
Wait, what book are you saying was $70
so
Canadian?
The Caradon book is $70 Canadian, and a normal codex is $60. So it's actually more expensive than the codexes, a full codex, which is crazy.
Okay, wait. Why do you want the Warzone book?
I don't,
just so I know.
but I'm not gonna buy
it.
But
it's cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
The fluff is actually really cool, and I mean, it has expanded rules in match play for House Raven, Freelance Blades.
Right,
There's
I
like
forgot about that.
Nurgle Detachment, Metallica. There's 2 AdMech ones, and there's like a Dark Eldar one, because Cult of Strife like immediately needed an extra boost because
yeah. I forgot that it did give you some of those match play rules. So yeah, if that's a faction of yours you'd want to buy, that's kind of steep though, $70 Canadian. What is that American?
It's
60.
Yeah, it's like the pricing's actually a little weird. It's actually cheaper slightly. Like if you do have a direct exchange, prices are slightly lower in Canada. Yeah. Like I think, but it's like negligible. But we also have tax. Like we have, I don't know what the sales tax is in California, but here in BC, I believe it's like 11% or something like that. So it ends up being basically like a wash probably. Yeah.
Okay.
And you're like, I don't know.
I can't believe you have a higher sales tax in California. California's taxes are usually the most.
Well, we have multiple taxes. We have GST, we have PST, HST, QST. I don't know. It's all taxes. Someone's got to pay for that healthcare, right? So.
Dude, I legit drive to Toronto from New York to buy my 40K stuff when I want to get like a big buy because it's cheaper. Yeah.
Nice. Okay.
The American dollar is like, it stretches very well in Canada right now and has been for the last like couple of years. Well, kind of like always actually.
But like shipping is a nightmare because like I usually now GW's doing the thing where like they lowered the threshold for free shipping, which has been really nice. But like normally like I had a paint client ship me something from the States, and it cost $60 in brokerage and like duty frees. And it's usually coming this way. It's not the other way. So I was like, oh, I'm sorry. Don't ship with UPS anymore, please. All right. So John, I kind of did the show a little bit out of order because apparently I'm bad at hosting podcasts and it's only our 3rd episode. But I guess I actually don't know a ton about your background and kind of how you got in the hobby. So can you how long have you been playing? How did you kind of get into how did you get into Warhammer? How long have you been doing this?
Sure. So when I was like maybe 12 or 13, I went and visited a cousin of mine north in California at a place called Santa Maria. And it's a smaller town, but it's big enough that it had game store, right? So he was all into Pokemon cards. And I was like, this is lame. But he was super into the Pokemon cards.
Charizards.
Right. Yeah. So he was like, I want to teach you how to play this game, and then we're going to go play this tournament at this store. And I was like, okay, fine. Because I'd spend a couple weeks with him every summer, right? And so I'm playing this game, and I'm like, okay, I get this mechanic. So we go to the store, and we walk in and to play this Pokemon tournament, and there's these guys playing a game with giant artillery pieces and orcs, right? And I'm like, dude, what the fuck is that? I don't play that. And so I walked over to the table, and I was the annoying 13-year-old who walks up to your table and was like, this is amazing. What is this, guys? And so they pointed me over to the wall, and this must have been like 1997 or 98, right? I think I'm older than both of you, right?
I'm 36.
I'm
Okay, we're the same age.
34.
Okay, so Jim and I are the same.
I'm the youngin. Whoa! Holy shit!
That's weird. I'm normally the young one in our group. I married an older woman. That's why.
Adam sounds like he's 200.
Adam is like, I think he might be immortal actually at this point. I don't know how many centuries he's been alive. So I bought a Dark Angels Codex from 3rd edition, I think it was, the little mini codex, because I really liked the artwork on it. And I was like, I really like the artwork of these guys. These guys look super cool. What do I need to play? And the shop owner was like, you need all this stuff. And I was like, cool, I can afford this little codex. So I bought the little codex. And then from that point, I was playing Warhammer on and off until I really got into it at the tail end of 4th edition. And that's when I started to play competitively in tournaments and stuff. And locally in Southern California, we had a store that opened, and that store's 40K guy, Travis, was one of the first guys tapped by Reese to be an LVO judge.
Oh, nice.
So the first year they didn't want to judge themselves. Reese and Frankie didn't want to judge LVO themselves. They tapped Travis and Adam, who were the original founders for TFG Radio. The following year, and Danny, they tapped Danny too. The following year, they needed an additional judge, and they asked Reese if it was cool if I would do it. And Reese and I had a good relationship for a while through writing with Frontline Gaming and stuff like that, so he knew who I was. And that's how I got on as an LVO judge. And then slowly, Travis he got in a different job. He moved away from Southern California, so he's not really a part of the team for the judging team anymore. And I'm good at making videos, so I'm the guy who makes the video every year for the LVO. And so that's why people started thinking me the head judge, even though we don't have a head judge. But it's because my face was out there all the time, and I was always the guy answering the questions on Facebook. But it is more of like there's a very even playing field amongst all of us. It's just that I happen to be the guy whose face is out there a lot. But that's basically how I got started in it. I've played almost every Bay Area Open that ever happened. I only missed one LVO where I played in the very first one, and then I've judged I skipped one and I judged the rest. So those are the big things I've done.
Mm-hmm.
I never made it to Nova. I really wanted to make it to Nova when Mike Brandt was still running it, and I never got there.
Please get to Nova, dude. It is wonderful.
Yeah. So I've never done Adepticon. I've never really been into the missions. So, yeah, Nova's one I really want to get to.
Yeah, Nova's the thing I like about Nova is it, like, I think I was talking about it the other day, but like one of the things that I think is maybe not talked about enough in the hobby is like how much charity work hobbyists do kind of across the board, like not just like I know in like our community in BC, like we do a ton of like there's a ton of events here that are really where the cornerstone or the reason they started was due to some charity or fundraising, and Nova is basically one of the biggest examples of that, right? Like it's literally a giant fundraiser. And I think there's something that's really cool about how big it's gotten, given the fact that its kind of roots are in basically charity. And I think that's something that, in a lot of other, like, how much charity work is like League of Legends doing, or is Warcraft doing, or is the Magic Gathering community doing, right? Like maybe it happens and I just don't know about it, but like it definitely feels like there's something about wargaming, especially like the community for GW and 40K and fantasy and stuff, that really like has that like that part of it. And I think that's a really cool part about our hobby is like, sometimes it's like, hey, what are you doing this weekend? Oh, I'm going to a fundraiser. you can get away with it.
Yeah.
To like kind of sell.
That's true.
That's true. So
next LVO, Jim, you can probably just ask Mark Merrill how much charity work League of Legends does, because he goes.
Yeah, and like I'm sure they do it. I guess my point is like that's very much corporate driven, I'd say, because Mark Merrill,
for sure.
Right, like imagine if GW, I bet if GW, like, and I know GW has done pretty good job of supporting, like both in providing prize support and maybe matching donations and stuff like that. But GW definitely doesn't lead the charge when it comes to charity work. Like they're not, they're obviously, is Riot a publicly traded company, or is it still private?
You know what? I actually don't know that.
Yeah, because I'd imagine like being private, they're able to do a lot more, whereas GW being public, they probably have a little bit more. They can't be as like kind of.
Well, and also the tax laws will be different in Great Britain, right? So they might not get as much benefit for it.
Yeah. And so, okay, so you got into judging, and like, I always think like there's this thing where it's like, I don't know, like I've always wanted to play, right? Like I think I could judge,
Yeah.
right? Like I'm able to judge. Do you ever like go to events where you're judging and wish you were playing instead, or is this something that you really do enjoy out of like a lot?
Yeah. Yeah, so every LVO I wish I was
Yeah,
playing.
okay. I was like, the truth comes out. We knew it.
However, that's really the only event I judge.
Right.
Um, if I'm gonna make the effort to take the time away from my family and spend the money to go to an event, I want to play in it. That's always been my thing. If because there's been events who have asked me to judge, and I'm like, cool. So how much are you paying me?
Right.
And they're like, nothing. And I'm like, cool. No.
Right.
Like, and or they'll be like, so we can pay like for your hotel room, but we can't cover your cost of travel. And I'm like, so you want me to travel all the way across the country, but you won't pay for like
and
no, if I'm
vacation
gonna pay
time and
for a
everything.
flight
Yeah.
to the place, I'll just pay for the hotel room too and play.
Yeah.
Like, no. LVO is different. One, it's LVO. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
Being asked to judge the biggest Warhammer 40K tournament in the world, you don't say no to that, right? Also, Reese does do a good job of compensating us for like our travel and all that kinds of stuff. And also, honestly, while I might have a chance of winning another tournament, I have zero chance of winning LVO. There's way too many good players there. Like I got close to winning Bay Area Open one time, and missed it by a couple of points to Don because Don Houston sucks and I hate it. But like LVO, no way. There's
Right.
no way I make it through that field. So it's like it's okay.
Yeah.
But otherwise, yeah, I don't really want to judge. But then again, people don't offer to like pay judges.
Right. And that's
really,
actually
so.
something that I do want to talk about later. Is kind of the whole like I guess, and it kind of ties into like the whole idea that like TOs shouldn't make money, judges shouldn't make money. The whole thing should be like very philanthropic. Like everyone should be giving up their time and doing it for the quote unquote community. Like I think that's a very bad way to like approach events.
I don't.
And so I
I don't
definitely want
believe
to
that
talk
at
about
all.
that later. But
Sure.
so have you ever felt like obviously I know you mentioned earlier that like there's no head judge, right? Like not just in the LVO but within like I think the ITC as a general. And obviously the ITC is like a big part of it's not like the not everyone plays ITC, especially like the Europeans. They
Right.
generally hate the ITC for
Yeah,
the
of
most
course.
part. But do you ever feel like how does that feel? I guess that maybe that I don't want to say pressure, but sometimes feeling like people what something that you might say carries different weight than like because the amount of times I've seen people quote you as like some sort of like like they're like, oh well John said this, and it's like, hey, well, like okay, that's cool, but like this
Yeah.
is like Bob's RTT in Ottawa, and they have like a Facebook screen
Right.
cap of something you said, and they're trying to like use that as like as a real thing. So like, how do you feel about that? And like in
Yeah.
general, do you ever feel like a lot of I guess pressure that to make the right decision? Because I know sometimes one of the things I want to talk about later too is like when judges do make the wrong call, what should happen, right? Like, I don't know if you guys are paying attention. They just fired some NHL ref for like mouthing off on the mic, and like I just always think I'm like, okay, well if judges make bad calls, like, but anyway, so what do you feel about that? How do you feel about that? Like, I don't say pressure, but like that expectation, I guess, that people put on you sometimes.
There is, man. There's shut up, Adam. Freaking Adam's in the chat. But he is right, and I'll tell that story. So there is a lot of pressure on that, and I usually try when responding to stuff to say this isn't official, right? Or this is how I might rule it at LVO, but I can't speak for anybody else, right? Because I'm aware of the fact that like if I say something, it's gonna get picked up by somebody, it's gonna be screenshotted, somebody's gonna take it someplace else and be like, this guy says this. And unless it's LVO, I mean, honestly, guys, my opinion doesn't carry any more weight than anybody else because unless it's LVO, it's not official. But there's pressure to make the right call, and the wrong call does get made. There's plenty of times where, there's a group on Facebook where it was a private group, and somebody was discussing a rule, and I said something like, I think the rule should be this. and literally somebody from my own Warhammer team responded with, "Are you fucking high?" And the people discussed the rule, right? And I was like, "Oh yeah, no, I get it. I totally right." I turned around with that, right? Like I'm not infallible.
Mm-hmm.
My opinions are colored by everything else, just like anybody else. And so some people jumped on it and were like, "Yeah, I don't think that's the way it is." And I was like, "Oh yeah, totally, definitely not." At an event, though, the judge's ruling is final. Period. Like that's just the way it works. Like that's the way it works in soccer, right?
Right.
Or if you're European football, right? The ruling of the referee is done. It's final. That's the way it works.
Right.
So there was I walked up to a table one time at LVO, and a player asked me a question about consolidating into combat and fighting again. It was the third or sixth round. It was the end of the day, right? And I'm tired, and I get it wrong, right? And I said, yeah, he can consolidate. Yes, he can fight again. I think I heard it wrong or something, right? Something happened, and I made the wrong call because because we had literally discussed this multiple times in our judges chat. I knew what the right answer was, and I walk away. And later, that guy comes up to me and goes, "Hey, you made the wrong call. I just confirmed it with Adam, and you cost me the game." And I said, "Okay," and I turned around and walked away.
Yeah.
And because that's all you can do, because I made the call, the judge's ruling is final, and the theory in that point is you couldn't come to a conclusion on your own, and you called for a judge.
Yeah.
And as soon as you've called for the judge, you've now ceded the responsibility for the decision to him or her, and that's that. And whatever they say is final, and that's what goes.
Yeah, and I mean, if you're in a position where the one judge ruling costs you the game, then you probably already lost. Like, you don't deserve to win that game. Like, if it comes down to that, like, you're already probably going to lose the game at that point, right? Like, and then don't blame the judge. Like, why did you get yourself in a position where that one, if the judge ruling went away against you, that you would lose the game? Because that's essentially what you're saying, right?
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, I mean, essentially, if you've called for the judge at that point, you've now ceded control to that person of the game for that specific decision, right? There was a time I walked up to a game and it was 7th edition. Oh man, I think it was 7th edition. Adam could tell us in the chat if it was 7th edition or not. And I walked up to the table and I'm like, what the hell's going on this table? Like the guy had his Tau riptide pulled apart so it would fit underneath a level of a building because he had it magnetized. And I'm like, you can't disassemble your model. And he's like, what? And I'm like, there's no, it's like, but that's not the question. I'm like, first of all, before I answer this question, we're going to sort out all the shenanigans at this table because there's nowhere in the rules you're allowed to disassemble a model to fit someplace. Like, you can't. It was 7th. I'm saying it was 7th. Yeah. And I was like, you can't do that. And he's like, okay, so what do we do? I was like, well, I don't know, because you also have other Tau models standing on the base of your riptide underneath this building, and you can't do that either, right? So we got to figure this all out. And so because you've called somebody in who's a third party at that point, there's all kinds of other stuff going on, right? You open yourself up to all that other kind of stuff. There was a game between, I think it was Nick Nanavati and Alex Harrison, and Nick was playing his orcs, and Harrison was playing the Flyer Eldar army. You guys remember that?
Yeah.
I think that was the last LVO that actually happened.
Yeah, I do.
And they called me over to measure something, and I pulled out the measuring tape, and I actually didn't put my finger on a model before I should have, and I knocked a model, right? Somebody else's model. And like the whole audience, the fishbowl, because there was the fishbowl effect for that game, of course, like, oh, rah! And I was like, I didn't even react because I'm like, it doesn't matter. I'm the judge. Wherever I say that model was is where it was. So I just put it back and I kept on measuring. And like, that's all there is to it.
I think there's
like,
I think there's
point,
like,
because you called that.
It's always unfortunate that like, I always think it's funny how there's like, and I've brought this up before in the past because it's happened to me where there's like the game you're playing on the table, and then there's the game that people think you're playing by like whether they're on stream or just watching. And I remember my game against Jeff at BAO, and like the discrepancy between what was happening in the room between us and what the chat thought was happening was like, it might as well have been two different games. Like there was a huge, people thought it was like we were like about to brawl, right? Like, and like at one point I was like, Jeff's, I mean, rest in peace, but he was a very intimidating guy, and he was like very intense. And I remember at one point I was trying to do something very technical, and I like accidentally dropped my model, and he was like chat blew up. He wasn't happy. Everyone was like, "Oh my god, what Jim's trying to like." I'm like, "Do you think I have like the like I don't know." It was just like I just thought it was really funny how people see something like that and they immediately attribute malice or like some sort of
Yes.
like crazy like I don't know like what I was gonna drop it and then like I don't know. It just feels very like on camera with all those people standing around. I was gonna do something like that.
Yes.
It just felt like so I understand what you're saying because I think a lot of times people don't really like they think it's like I don't know like you've killed a cat or something like that. Like it's a guys at the end of the day it's just a
Yes.
game, you know like
Well, and the stream games are totally different to judge
yeah
too, because as a judge, I'm walking into a situation where there's two people who totally care about this thing, and I'm walking up as somebody who couldn't. I really don't give a shit who wins.
mhm.
I don't. I don't care who wins. So I'm walking up to the
Agreed.
table, and they're all
We have
hyped
a
up
really
and
difficult
stuff.
time.
They're all crazy into it. Yeah, no, not
Mhm.
that. And somebody blows up, and I'm like, I don't care, guys. Like, I literally walked up to this a couple seconds ago. I have no vested interest in this whatsoever. Um, Jeff was very intense. You're right. And there was a game, first round of BA or LVO one year, where they went overtime. They went way overtime, and I had to tell them, you have to. This game's over. You have to score it now. This is before chess clocks. It was
Yeah.
before we had made all those rules. And Jeff literally looks at me and goes, I don't care. I'll go to jail. We're finishing this game. And I'm looking at him like, what are you talking about, dude? And he's like, we just need to score it. We're done. And I'm like, well, then just say that first, right? But he was very intense. And then later on, like a week later, I wrote my recap for Frontline Gaming. And in the comment section, Jeff was like, I'm sorry I threatened to beat you. Oh, crap. Is that what you were doing? I think, but in his mind, by saying "I don't care, I'll go to jail" was like a threat, and I was like, I did not take it that way at all, because that's the thing. I had no vested interest in that game other than you need to finish so I can put your scores into BCP and have BCP fail, and then have to reseed everything so we can start round two, right? Like
Yay.
that's what I needed. That's all. That's it.
So
But he was so intense in this game
yeah.
that he was seeing it totally differently, and so I think that's what a lot of people don't get is that as a judge, you walk up to a table and you don't care.
Yeah.
I don't care who's in this game or not.
So
I
that
don't. I'm not
that's actually
getting-
a really good kind of segue into something that I did want to bring up. Well, it's kind of two points, and I think they kind of tie together. So first is kind of the concept. And I know there's been lots of discussion on like active versus passive judging. Like maybe, and I know there's lots of games like Magic the Gathering where they literally have a judge assigned per table standing there watching, and they're there to catch like as soon as something wrong happens, they catch it and they vocalize it. What are your thoughts as far as, and I know obviously with 40K, like we can't have at a 100-man event, we can't have 50 judges. That would be ridiculous, right? But obviously, usually the top tables get policed a little bit more. The games are usually a little
Yeah.
bit more important. So, what are your thoughts on like that whole concept of like active versus passive, and why do you see, and I guess like why do you think, you know, as someone that does a lot of judging, like, do you see that there's benefits and downfalls to both, or is there one that you feel like is kind of a better way to go?
Yeah, I've always been in the camp of passive judging is the better way to go with a game as complex as Warhammer, right? So like Magic is complex, but Magic is nowhere near as complex as Warhammer is. There's so many different interactions. I would be shocked if anybody could claim that they know all the rules for 40K well enough to actively judge a
Right.
game. Any random game, right? I'm not saying you couldn't active judge a game of, say, Deathwing versus Space Marines.
Sure.
There's plenty of people with enough knowledge of Space Marines and Deathwing to actively judge that game. But is there enough people who have enough knowledge of the game that they could actively judge any match between any of the factions and any list? Like the number of variations
Mhm.
for what you can see on the tabletop has to be in the millions, right?
Mhm.
I would love somebody with way more time and mathematical ability than me to sit
Stat
down.
center, get on it.
Yes, that's
Yeah,
get
really
on
good.
it. To figure out the number of variations you can have and rules you'd have to
Mhm.
know, right? That said, I do like the idea of after a certain point in an event, the judges focus on certain tables. Like we LVO where we focus on the certain tables and we patrol them more often.
Right.
And as we're doing so, we actively listen for potential
Right.
issues. Those issues, not just like rules, but also like, is this game hyper contentious and are they being jerks to each other? Right. So stuff like that. So I always feel like when it comes to rules, we're more there if you need us.
Mm-hmm.
But if it comes to somebody's poor sportsmanship, we might step in sooner
Right.
than it would be for like a rule. But also, like, what are the chances of you mishearing or you hearing a rule being misplayed by walking by?
It's very low.
It's pretty low.
Yeah.
So the idea of like having an active judge at the table is not possible because of the numbers, like you said. But then also, the idea of active judging by walking is difficult because you're going to miss a lot of stuff anyways because it's just very, very complex, the game.
Right. Yeah. So like one thing, like this has been something that, and I know you like TTS is not real Warhammer, as per your memes. But one thing that I've experienced.
Oh, you saw those memes earlier?
Well, one thing I've experienced in the last like 2 or 3 months, I've been playing some TTS with like Team Canada and stuff, is that oftentimes there's 6 to 8 people watching every game, right? There's sometimes the head judges will pop in the channels because there's only ever like 3 or 4 games going on at once in like we're playing the Greek Hammer event currently, and because you can chat with people like off the main thing, like I can send a Facebook message to my team and we have like a team chat that we're all in. If a rule is played wrong during that game, we make a very strong point not to like coach, but if someone tries to use a stratagem, and we'll say, hey, he can't use that stratagem, or like if someone does something that's illegal or against the rules and the other player doesn't catch it, oftentimes our coach will say something, say, hey, like that unit's not applicable for that stratagem, and that's the first time. And obviously TTS is a very unique environment for that. It's something that like allows that, but like there was a lot of times I didn't realize how many mistakes people made until like playing a game, until I actually watched a TTS game with like 6 or 8 people uh, commentating on mistakes, because that's literally like I was like, oh my god, like we would all be expelled out of every event because like every player was making multiple like 3 to 6 mistakes, sometimes big mistakes like misplays, using stratagems wrong, things out of order, and it's TTS, so there's like a lot of like, hey, don't worry about it, right? Like it's fine, but I can imagine in a real game of 40K, that happens so much that literally we'd all be Alex Harrisons, right? In some sense. No offense, Alex.
So there was a game. I won't name any names for this one, but there was a game where I walked up to the table, and the one guy was being a super stickler about something, right? And I was like, okay, well, I'm gonna stand here for a minute. I'm gonna watch this game. And at the end of my watching the game, I turned to the guy who was being the stickler, and I said, look, you have a unit here that's strung out. You didn't measure properly. These 3 guys are out of coherency. They cannot possibly hold these 2 objectives, right? This unit here is definitely not painted to the 3 color standard for our event. And then you had this unit over here, when you measured it, that's definitely not 6 inches from where it was. I watched you. And although you may have bumped it accidentally when putting it down, it still is further. So how tight is it you want me to judge this game? Because right now there's 3 yellow cards, you get a red and you'd be out. Whereas you called me to the table for this very specific thing with your opponent, wanting a DQ. Like he was actively wanting this guy to be thrown out of the tournament. And I said, so I've been here for this long, watched both you play, and the only person who's committed any fouls is you.
Yeah.
So I think amount of leniency is involved because there's nobody who can play a perfect game of 40K. And you're right, like TTS has shown that to a T. So I think there needs to be like a shift. Oh man, was it Val? I think it was Val Heffelfinger, which I don't think that's his real last name. I have no idea what this guy's last name is, right?
It's not even his real name.
We can't speak his name.
Is Val even his real name?
No, it's not.
No,
I won't say what it is because I don't want him to feel
depressing.
Yeah, I don't know
You'll
if
laugh
like
at
how
him.
secretive it is.
Anyways,
but yeah, it's not even
this
his
guy, right? This guy had a very good point. He made a really good point that I'd never quite had in my head on my own. Like I'd never put the pieces together, right? And it is that we need to change the way cheating is looked at in 40K to go from it's cheating to you committed a foul.
Yeah.
it's a penalty, right? So it's like in American football where a flag gets thrown because the guy was holding. Well, every play, an American offensive lineman is committing holding.
Yeah.
They are. And it's when you get caught that the flag goes up, you get a penalty, you are penalized. It's the same thing with soccer, right? A guy slides, his cleat is slightly too high up. Was it on purpose? Was it not? I don't know. Yellow card, right? It's a penalty, not you're thrown out because you cheated. It's when you get to the point where, well, you've slid that way 3 times now, red card, right? Or whatever the case may be. So changing the around what cheating is or is not in Warhammer is going to be necessary to move on if we're going to continue to stream games, because you cannot play a perfect game of 40K.
Right.
But it might also require more penalties to be given at any given moment. So that's another issue for judges to tackle.
Do you think
so,
that
John,
change? Go ahead, David.
Sorry. So, John, I have this thing like where I've been thinking about this a lot lately because like I started 40K playing back in like tail end of second edition, and I noticed that like Games Workshop really perpetuates, and in the stores perpetuates like strong amounts of sportsmanship, strong amounts of just like being a good human being as the basis of playing Warhammer.
Yeah.
And I think there was like this like duality, like when War Machine became a big thing, it was like page 15, people were like, play like you got a pair, and it was like be an asshole, and you're like, cool, dude.
They were supposed to be the anti-GW, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So so where I'm going with this is like there's a lot more sportsmanship oriented parts about 40K because GW once and forever will be like, we're a model company, not a game company, which is like weak wiggle room to be like, we make bad rules, like what are you gonna do about it? With that in mind, it's like where does like judging people just being kind of like casual gamers being in a serious setting, what is it point of being like they made a mistake because they're just casual and they make mistakes versus like the person is like obviously like trying to con the system, and so that's where the hard part I think lies, is like as a judge being like, you go to a tournament, you're gonna get tryhards that are like they're casual players but they're tryhards, and then you have these guys who are just like, I want to play the game. When do you like, how do you usually handle those kind of people that like,
so
that are the tryhard, like casual players, like you were just saying about the guy who was like out of coherency, wrong color amount of paints. He's obviously like much more probably casual and not like a stickler. How do you usually handle people like that?
The problem is identifying the groups, right? So it's really difficult to identify the big fish from the small pond guy, which is a common thing, right? You get a guy who thinks they're going to win LVO because they dominate their local scene, right?
Yep. Or faction.
And sometimes those guys are the ones who are like, we got to play by this, and this, and like they're very stickler, right? So figuring out the intent of the person is the hardest part.
Mm-hmm.
If the person has malicious intent or not. And a lot of the time it honestly goes to, does this person have a history? Have I dealt with this person multiple times before? Has this person been every LVO consistently, every round consistently an issue? And if so, then my tolerance and my level of belief for whether or not that person is being genuine or disingenuous changes.
Mm-hmm.
So if I've had to come to your table 8 times in the last 3 rounds, and every time is because of something specific, I'm pretty much going to think you're disingenuous. You might be playing the nice guy, but you're not. Or if you consistently are getting some rules wrong.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not the same rule every game because that would be patently obvious, right? Mm-hmm. You can't play the same rule wrong after I called you or your opponent's called you on it. Yeah. But if you've consistently gotten the rules wrong in each game and it's always in your favor, then my ability to think that you are genuinely playing the game straight is diminished.
Right.
So I have a question for you really quick too about, because I did judging for like a 100-person event, which is not the same as like an 800-person event.
100 is still a lot of people, dude. Don't sell yourself short. That's a lot of games.
No. But like LVO 2019, 2020, because that was the last LVO. I was there, and I just remember there was just like so many tables, and I'm just like, because I used to judge in the past, like I just started thinking about like this is such an anxiety-stricken like moment. Like think about like how many judges are actually here. First of all, how many judges were at LVO that year? Because there were so many people, and also like do you guys both talk to do all your judges like do you guys talk to each other between rounds being like, hey, there's this one guy, he's causing problems, like if his name comes up, like do make sure you like tell us about it? How do you guys usually handle that?
So there are a lot of judges.
Yeah.
There are 6 or 7 head judges, which we don't call head judges. They're called what do we call them now?
Executive.
No, we made up a different term so it wouldn't be head judge, and I don't remember what the term was we made up because we didn't get to have LVO in 2021.
Afterwards.
So there's so Adam's saying there's 7, and then there's a couple of other judges who are additional, who are not the same level. And generally what we do is there's a list of anybody we've carded. Anybody who receives a yellow card or red card is put into a list. Now the red card is usually either a round DQ or an event DQ, so that kind of takes care of itself. But the yellow cards we track, and we have a doc we put it all into, and we can all track it.
Oh, awesome.
Any decision that's going to be very contentious, we generally call another judge in for. And have another, like a second pair of eyes, right? You get a second opinion. I'm a big proponent of asking for second opinions. I probably drive Adam, Danny nuts because I'm always saying, give me a minute, walk over to them, double check it, walk back, right? So that's kind of how you would deal with that. But yeah, it's a lot of people for not enough judges, and we get a lot of steps in. Like, my phone tracks my steps. Danny wears one of those special watches that tracks his steps, and we walk miles each day at the LVO up and down those tables over and over and over again. Unless you're Matt Root, because Matt Root just disappears, and then he pops up when there's drama,
right,
to help out.
So I have two thoughts, John, because like I actually I listened to your guys' episode, and I think that was what kind of spurred having you on. Was I listened to your guys' episode on TFG where you were addressing some of the issues around Clutch City, and I actually agreed with how the TOs handled it there regarding the list issues with Sean Naden. But the two kind of questions I have, and this is kind of where I think it's important that there is less subjectivity, I guess, in judging, which is obviously before an event, if an error is caught, I think it's fairly easy to fix. During an event, it's a little bit more complicated, and I think obviously we would like a solution that feels fair. But generally it can still be remedied. Like for instance, like let's just pretend Sean, like let's pretend like someone else made a list mistake that wasn't ambiguous, like the one Sean made, and they just were using the wrong points, just straight up. Like it had nothing to do with like 2 different versions or whatever.
Sure.
In those cases, like, I mean, I would, and I guess where my issue with the approach that you guys are advocating for was like, I look at someone like Alex Harrison, and I've met Alex. He's a super nice guy. He's always been super polite to me.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
I ask, I'm like, well, how do we like if you are in a situation where either you're caught cheating or foul or whatever you want to call it, how do players remedy their reputations, right? So like, is there a pathway here? There's got to be a way, and I remember, Josh Death, again, probably someone that had a huge reputation in his kind of day, and I, having met Josh Death probably a half dozen times, always like super nice. Like I never had an issue with his personality. It was always his table play, right?
Correct.
And it had nothing to do with their personal thing. It was just how they
played. Oh yeah, Josh is a super nice guy.
But the question is like what is the remedy? Like if you're a player, say that maybe has either been caught cheating intentionally or unintentionally, there's got to be some way to to like rehabilitate yourself, because a lot of people are saying, oh, like just don't play for 2 years. Well, the first tournament you come back, you haven't actually. It's like when you get in a car crash and you get your license suspended, and
Yeah.
like your insurance rates go up. And usually, like they only go back down if you're an active driver, right? Like they only like if you just
Correct.
don't drive for 10 years, your insurance rates stay high because you have to have like an
Yep.
Yeah.
actively insured vehicle because they
Yep.
want to see that you actually have gotten better. So you can't
Yeah.
have a
Yeah.
situation where
Dropping off the face of the earth isn't going
no,
to be.
that doesn't. So I guess let me split this up. So there's got to be a way, and what do you think the pathway is for players to rehabilitate themselves? Because I've read just about every I'm sorry post in 40 comp 40k. Like I've read all of the sob stories.
Yeah.
I'm sorry
Under the
posts, the
seat
regret,
apology
like I
car
didn't mean
video.
to, whatever. But let's say, you know what? What if someone was like, yeah, I tried to cheat and I got caught. Okay. Now what's the path forward? So that's the first question. Second, what should the remedy be post, whether it's post event or during an event, when it comes like, and I know you mentioned that there's certain players that maybe you watch a little bit more carefully, and I think that's totally valid. Maybe they have reputations for cheating, but I think, and you're starting to convince me otherwise, because obviously I don't have your insight. I'm just talking as a player, because I think
Yeah.
players often want kind of like they want like capital punishment when it comes to cheaters. So they don't want there to be any
They do.
wiggle room. They don't want there to be any sort
No.
of like I don't want it because John is friends with the judge, or maybe Adam knows the judge, or the judge knows the player. I don't want to ever feel like they're going to judge differently based on a personal relationship or a reputation. I want them to kind of call the balls and call the strikes, right? Like you want them, regardless of
Yeah.
who did it or their reputation, you want there if there's an event of a foul or a cheat, you want there to be a consistent uniform punishment or remedy applied across, because that feels fair, right? What doesn't feel fair as a
Yeah.
player is if there's different, it feels like there's like different, we live in have two justice systems, right? Where like some people can get away with
Mhm.
more and some people get away with less. So I guess that's 2 points, but I just wanted to bring them up because they
Yeah.
do stem from this idea that like tracking players and having certain players
Yeah.
that are like in the bad books, but also treating players differently as well. And kind of, I think that's
Sure.
two things that
Yeah.
we really need to kind of figure out.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And that's a really tricky issue and an important point. So that's one of the main things that we think about as we add other LVO judges. Anybody who we're going to add officially as the master judge or head judge or whatever you
Right.
want to call it, they have to basically prove the ability to be impartial, which is hard. Um, and it's because you're gonna walk up to a table where you're friends with somebody. Like Jim, you and I talked a lot the last season, because you were doing great and I was doing all these articles and I wanted to talk to you. And then we met at Bay Area Open. We hung out a little bit, and then at LVO I have to make judge calls, and so there has to be a trust amongst the other players that I'm not going to walk up to your table and be like, well, I like Jim, I think he's a good guy, so I'm going to rule differently if he happens to have done
Right.
something wrong, right? And then the inverse is true. I can't have a history with, well, I've had to watch your table 3 LVOs in a row one time, and you give me a lot of like attitude, and I'm going to walk up to your table and automatically think, no, like I'm going to just take it out on you. And that is difficult, and you have to trust people to be able to do that. And that trust has to be earned by other people seeing you do it, right? Um, there was an example of the year Brandon Grant won LVO. He's in his game with Alex Harrison. The central objective got bumped in the middle of a turn, and the chat went crazy. The objective got moved.
That
The
doesn't
objective
sound
got
like the
bumped.
stream chat at all.
And it wasn't even, and you'd think by me telling you the story, who do you think bumped the objective with the chat going crazy, Alex or Brandon?
I mean, we'd assume Alex, but obviously I'm sure this is a case of like,
It was
Yeah.
Brandon. Brandon bumped the objective, right? And the chat goes crazy. And
Mhm.
I come in, and they're actively playing. I'm trying as my best as possible to do what I need to do to get the objective back to where it needs to be in the center of the board without interfering with their game. I'm not fast enough, and I'm doing it. And Brandon goes, "It's fine," and I go, "No, Brandon, you bumped the objective. It is moved." And the chat all called it out. And it's true. You bumped it and it needs to move. And he goes, "Oh, okay. I didn't know." Totally fine, right? So he puts the clock onto Alex's turn because he's done with his turn. Alex says, "Okay, but the time shouldn't be on me." And he goes to pause it, and I go, yeah, that's fine. And he pauses the clock. And somebody in the audience yells, cheater. You're cheating. Because he paused the clock. And the rules for the clock were
Very strict.
only a judge can pause it. And I'm literally right there with the guys talking to them. But because I didn't pause that clock, and because Alex had the reputation he had, and even though it was Brandon that had moved the objective, everybody wanted to dog all of a sudden.
I remember that because
And
I
I'm
had a
like,
game where I paused the clock and called you on a judge, and you yelled at me too. So I remember that.
Yeah. And it is one of those things where, like, obviously you want to pause the clock because nobody wants to lose their time, and I get it. And that's one of those rules in the clock rules that's hard for everybody. But that's a case of where, as the judge in the moment, I was being as fair as everyone to possible. And I allowed Alex to pause the clock knowingly because I was in the middle of taking an action to rectify a problem, right? That was created by the other player. Neither of those players had a problem with the fact that I allowed Alex to pause the clock.
Right.
Brandon's fine. He knew he had bumped it because I told him. I had to fix it. It shouldn't come off of Alex's time because it was Brandon's fault. If anything, it should have stayed on him. But I would have paused the clock anyways. So let's move on. But the fishbowl and the people online, right, wanted blood. And that is the other part of the issue of this whole thing is that, you know, you're saying you have to be able to trust the judges that they're not going to play favorites. You have to be able to trust them they're going to be fair, and that they won't like batter a player because of their reputation. And all that is true, but then all of that is also subject to the perception of everybody watching from home.
And as far as like I think the London GT, the infamous one, was in 2018, I believe, like September of 2018, and we're now 3 years later, and still like we played Team England in Greek Hammer, right? And just I will tell you straight up, even though we're playing TTS, even though there's like multiple people watching every game, there's judges there. There was conversation around playing Alex because we're just like, because he still has that reputation, and as much as I'm sure he's worked to get rid of it, right? The question is like, at what point is it like, when is it enough? Like, at what point have you done enough? And it's like, all right, now people are just, they just will never like it. It can't stay with you forever, right? Like, I don't want to be at like LVO 2030 and like, you know, and it's like, oh, like here comes like, and then people are still making water bottle jokes in 10 years. Like I'll be like, I won't be surprised, just because it feels like, you know, people don't let go of these things, and you know, I'm sure he's, you know, yeah. So that's
to a
I guess
broader issue with
yeah.
Speaks to a broader issue with like social media and cancel culture and all this stuff, right? Like, you are not allowed to make a mistake and then rectify it anymore. Like, you're just not. Like, as somebody who's a teacher, I live in constant fear that I will slip up and say the wrong thing in the classroom and somebody will like catch it on video or something.
Right.
And like, even if it's a slip of the tongue or it's like I said one thing but I really meant the other and I rectify it right away, doom, done, I'm fired, I can never teach again. Right? Or the same thing with like judging. What happens if I walk up to a table last round at LVO and I make the absolute wrong call? I'll tell you, I doubt they ever let me actively judge a final table ever again.
Right.
Because there is no redemption allowed right now, ever. Like, you look at Twitter, look at all this nonsense. Like, I try to spend as little time on Twitter as possible, but like, it's real, it's a thing, and it's not like a political ideology spectrum idea. It's like, I don't care where you land on that spectrum. There are people who want people not to be able to do anything ever again because of something they said one time or did one time or whatever. And I think it's hard because a lot of people don't view redemption arcs as a thing outside of like literature and movies.
Right. Yeah, I mean,
I think my fictional character can be redeemed as much as I want.
Yeah,
Magnus did nothing wrong.
People were rooting hard for Jamie Lannister, but didn't work out. So Tom has a question, and I don't know if you can answer this. It's a long time ago, but it's kind of related. But he's asking, I guess, and I actually remember this game because I was there and I remember talking to Scary. But I know him and Alex had a very contentious game at LVO 2019 in round 3. So that was in the last LVO. Seems like it was I can't believe I'm saying it's 2 years ago. And yeah, I guess Tom was wondering if you can comment on that, or if you have any thoughts on that. But I don't know if you know the details. I mean, maybe that's a question best asked to Ridvan himself and Alex himself. But
yeah, I did not actually judge that game at all. I never walked up to the Alex and Scary game, but we did discuss it as a group. That was an issue of there weren't judges involved in that game a lot. It wasn't asked for. The other games where there was a judge around a lot when it was Alex's game, it was because there were issues and things had to be solved. Like that game, so the game I described earlier with Nanavati, where I bumped the orc model, right? And then I placed it back and I was like, I don't fucking care. It's wherever I say it was, right? That was, I think, the next round or 2 rounds later, maybe something like that, was the next day. I was not actively judging that game. I was wandering around. One of the judges we were vetting for it, Mitch Pelham, he took it upon himself to stand there and watch that game. We didn't assign Mitch to the table, right? I've been assigned to tables before. We've assigned other people to tables before. That's a totally different thing than this game's got a huge fishbowl around it. I'm going to watch it. And it's oftentimes people are like, oh, you're camping this table, judges. We're camping the table because you're all camping the table. And there's the other issue of we have to watch that game closely because you're all watching the game closely. And it's not that you're going to catch something and be like, oh my God, this person's cheating. It's we have to watch the table because we don't want you influencing the game.
Right.
Because I walked up to tables before and there's people talking and I go, you have to stop. You can't be talking about that within earshot of the players.
Yeah.
Because you're actively going to influence the game.
Right.
So a lot of the times players who are like, you guys are camping this specific player's game. Well, that's because the players are actively camping that game. And we have to be there to help facilitate the fairest thing possible for the 2 players, which sometimes involves, I need all of you to back up a couple steps. I need all of you to stop talking for a few minutes about the game and let them figure it out.
I can definitely tell you from my experience, like I'm super comfortable playing on stream. I actually get more nervous when there's just like physically lots of people, even if it's off stream, just because it's not necessarily because I'm worried about getting caught. It's just like the physical proximity of all those people staring at you, like that does have an effect on your performance for sure. And I've seen some players and sometimes people that are on stream, like they can't operate under stream. Like there's just like and that's like a performance thing, and obviously it's like different for everyone, but like I guess my point is like those crowds can have a pervasive effect on games and opponents, and I don't think that's necessarily fair. And I think a lot of players don't want to make a fuss about that. Like if you're at a high level game, there's this expectation that your game's going to get watched by many people. And I actually do really appreciate how, like with the LVO especially, and some of the other events, they've started to be a little bit more like kicking people off, kicking people out. Like I think that's actually really important, because imagine playing chess and like there was like 30 dudes, sweaty dudes standing around you staring at you. Like it's just not, it's a game that really requires a high level of focus. And I just don't think it's, and some people are better at dealing with it than others. And this is not a game where, it's not a game of who's better at focusing under pressure, right?
I love like high level of focus. How many of us are sober and are like?
Well, like the guys that are winning at the top tables are usually not blackout
sober.
like you, David, and me.
Yeah, I'll make that comment about LVO in specific. The people who are winning those games are the ones who are taking it seriously and sober.
Yeah, I know.
And the other thing about that is, so, man, you said something, Jim, and I had it, and then I lost it. I had a train of thought. Oh, and well, that's the other thing. Like you're talking about, they get nervous because there's all those people around, right? And that's the other thing about, like, I bumped the model, and I was like, I don't give a shit, because that requires a certain, not only not caring because it's not my game, but also like a certain amount of, this isn't your game.
Right.
F off.
Yeah.
Like you're sitting here watching me play, but this isn't your game to partake in. There is no third wheel. There is no third party playing this game. Even the judge is not a third party. Like we state that specifically multiple times in like the ICC code of conduct and stuff. Like I'm not a third party playing the game for you. If I as a judge have to actively take part in your game, somebody's probably getting a yellow card.
Right.
because it means that I've had to actively take over something you were doing so poorly that you're at that point it's a penalty. And like Jim, you were saying, not everybody's capable of that type of like inflappability in front of an audience.
Yeah. I mean, like
just
a great example, like
not everybody's the
look
same.
at someone like, you know, and I always think about my game against Jeff because that was like one of the first games that I've ever had where like his physicality was actually a part of the game, like because and Jeff he was a streamer, he's used to sitting in crowds in front of audiences, like that's he's
competitive
newcomer,
esport
right?
player, yeah.
Whereas like between him this is the first time I'd ever played him, between his like physicality, his like personality, and then also being at a top table on stream with all those people watching, that definitely had an effect on me. Versus my previous game, I played against Siegler. We played in like the hall outside, and it was like the most chill game. I was so relaxed, it was so easy. And then it was like the polar opposite, and it had nothing to do with the fact that I was in a final, because I'd been in lots of finals before that. It just had to do with like all those factors combined, and you know that's something that I obviously need to get better at. But anyways, I mean, I do want to kind of move on.
As a player, so not as a judge, as a player, I take my cues from my opponent. So if I walk up to a table and my opponent's like Jeff Robinson, right, who's going to stand there with his thumbs in his waistband, rocking back and forth with his big muscles, right? Very quiet, very stoic, going to watch every single thing you do, make sure you're doing it all properly, right? I'm going to play similarly. If I walk up to the table and it's a guy like, oh God, I can't remember. So one of the Tabletop Titans guys I played at BAO one year was like jovial and let me buy you a drink and let's just have fun. I'll be like, cool, let's have fun. But and in that instance, you have to, you take your cue from the player you're playing. At the same time, if the jovial person starts to get nitpicky about rules, that ends for me. It becomes okay, that's how we're going to play. That's fine. The drink goes down. I'm not having any more of whatever this drink is, and we're going to play this game more tight. And I think that's something also players need to be aware of, is that there are players who will go into it with, I have a certain way of playing and this is the way it is, or they have I'm going to pretend we're playing hardball, like somebody just said in the chat, but in reality, I'm trying to play softball for myself. Right. And make it seem like we're all playing softball, but we're going to actually play hardball for you. Which is another thing that you have to be aware of. And being aware of all these different personalities and all the different types of players that you're going to run into, it's just like anything else. It's like playing poker.
Absolutely.
Or it's like playing golf. Like I remember when Tiger Woods was young and people used to talk about the intimidation factor, right? Like the intimidation factor of like, he would stand closer than is like normal when you're putting, but not against the rules, right? Like stuff like that. So I think there's a lot of that too, that people just aren't prepared for when they get to the upper levels.
Okay, I agree, and I think I think that's part of the game. I just think people maybe like they don't realize how big of a factor that can be, especially and don't get me wrong, like a lot of people in our community are not exactly like this like kind of social, super like extroverted people that are like used to like being around tons of people. Like a lot of people, I'm gonna mischaracterize, including myself. Like I'm a bit of as much as I'm extroverted in like my professional life and when I'm like out in the real world, I'm very much introverted, and so like that can be intense sometimes. So I just want to move on a little bit because I'm being mindful of your time. So one thing that we did talk about is, and I kind of we brought it up, but I want to kind of get like your kind of final thoughts on the issue, which is right now, the code of conduct is a great tool that the judges use. And one of the things I was advocating for is a much broader, more expansive code of conduct that had more discrete, I guess, penalties or remedies for certain situations. So, thinking just back to the situation a few weeks ago, like, titles in sports are stripped posthumously or like after the event if something is found cheating, if someone fails a doping test.
Unless you're the Houston Astros.
Yeah, right. So like, I mean, and or like your world record, like look at all the baseball players that were doping, like they have a star beside them, right? Like everyone knows that there's essentially consequences for these kinds of things. So do you think that the code of conduct could go farther than it is? Because right now I feel like it's very much about table behavior versus about like actual game rules or like mistakes or stuff like that. It's very much about like the gentleman's agreement. But do you think the code of conduct or some version of it, whether it's like a set of kind of, just like in sports, you have here are the rules of the game, and here's the penalty that should be assessed, right? Like,
Yeah,
and it's very
absolutely.
straightforward. If you get a slashing, it's 2 minutes. If you get a head kick, it's like 5 minutes, and a game misconduct. So head kick. I was like, what game are we playing? So
what's a head kick? What's a head kick in 40K gonna do?
If you hit someone in the head, in like hockey, you get like an automatic 5 minute, and then you're kicked out of the game. Like, these are kinds of very codified penalties, and they're very like it's more objective. So once you've determined that error has happened, now there is a subjective component, as you mentioned, but once you've determined, yes, this player made X mistake, whether it was intentional or not, do you think there should be more codified outcomes, or do you think it should still be up to the judges to kind of make those calls? Because what you were mentioning earlier about making sure the judges at, say, LVO are all above board, I believe you. Like, when I go to LVO, I have no doubt. But a lot of events and a lot of smaller communities don't have that. Your store owner's running the event. Your best friend's running the event. There's all sorts of smaller events where they're not going to have that level of kind of like objectivity for the judging. And oftentimes, like, the guy that runs most of the events in BC, I've been playing with him for 20 years, right? And I know that, I hope not. Like, I hope he's objective, but he's not he doesn't TO at, like, he doesn't have that level of professionalism probably that you might have. So for the smaller TOs, especially for like the GTs, majors, these not big events with a ton of eyes, do you think there should be more tools for those TOs to be able to kind of like apply judgments, penalties, etc., so that like there's less there's less, a lot of times the TO is the guy that runs the event. It's not a separate person. Like, imagine Reese also was the TO. Like, that's essentially what happens in 90% of events.
Yeah, and I think that there does need to be a larger toolbox for TOs to pull from. And the code of conduct was never meant to be a perfect document that never gets changed or amended, right? Like, it's meant to be something that's living, that changes, that we amend, we can expand, we can contract. There's definitely an idea that, like, there should be a certain amount of professionalism that's expected and required of certain size events, as opposed to, like, your RTT that's down the street, right? Like, I'm never going to ask for a ruling from Adam at our local RTT because I don't want him to influence my game ever, right? But if it's Danny, I might ask Danny, right? But there's a lot of that, right? Like, oh man, I don't want to ask this guy, he doesn't like me, or I just had a bad game with him 2 weeks ago, and now I have to ask this guy for something, right? So I think that there should be probably some type of like a training program, or just like a basic, like, this is the best way to judge. These are some ways that you can prepare yourself to judge. But it also comes down to the fact that, like, there's going to be a certain amount of, like, do you have the personality to do this well or not?
Yeah.
Like, are you somebody who's capable of impartiality, or are you not? I mean, there's a reason why all federal justices are put through the Senate, right? In the United States, like, they all have to get confirmed because, like, they want to know, can these people do these certain things? And, like,
with varying success,
I mean, does that mean
I'm sure
that
you'll agree?
With varying success, I definitely agree. But that process is in place for that reason, and we don't have anything even remotely like that, right?
And I think that goes to a bigger point, which we talked about earlier, which is, I think, and I would love it if Games Workshop, I know I still kind of feel like they're a little bit half committed to match play in a competitive way, like, obviously from a rule set, but if they really went all in with, like, and I'm not sure what Mike Brandt's been up to the last year, like, because he sure hasn't been running events, but I'm really hoping that, like, as part of his role, at least he can help push a more officialized judging system. And I would love nothing more, and I definitely agree with you. I think judges should be paid. They should like, there's like, even the local referees that, like, are stick and puck, and like here, it's like they get paid.
Yeah, they get
and they're
paid.
just like random dudes that aren't playing. It's not like they're trained referees, right? Like, they get paid $50 to go play in the mixed league here to ref the games. Like, I could go do that, right? And I so, like,
my son played a baseball game yesterday. There was an umpire that the league paid.
And, like, I think that should be part of ideally every part of the, like, events budget. Obviously, I mean, it is up to the TOs essentially, but I'd love it if GW had, and I know I think FF Fantasy Flight, when they were doing like when Xing was like really high up in the, like, it was like a lot bigger. I think it's kind of contracted quite a bit the last few years, but I feel like their tournament circuit, their match play, and the way that FFG supported that was quite like totally different compared to the way GW supports, where they're like, yeah, okay, here's some rules, but like we're not going to give you like prize packs, we're not going to give you like trophies, we're not going to give you any of this other stuff, we're not going to like set any, even the, except if you're playing at Warhammer World, Games Workshop basically didn't want anything to do with it. So I'm just wondering what you think. Like, obviously, I think you probably agree that they should be paid, but like, what do you think the way forward is? Because there's people trying to make this into an esport, and I feel like until we answer some of these basic questions and solve these things, it's never going to be able to do that.
The esports thing is weird. Like, I'm sorry, I don't want to watch Warhammer for 3 hours.
Yeah.
It's not watchable.
No. Like, that's why we started to do our TLDR battle reports on TFG, right? Where like I try to make sure that the battle report is under 15 minutes if possible. Like,
thank you.
Get the big stuff, do some commentary, get some pictures up there, put a couple memes, make it a little funny, be done, right? I mean, even when I shoutcast games, sometimes like people will have me on to shoutcast games, and I'm like, oh my god, this is the most boring game ever. How can I make this better? Well, I'll make fun of the players, and then I get in trouble because I made fun of somebody's last name, right?
Right.
So like, I'm just trying to make this game amusing for anybody watching at home because this thing is so boring.
I think a really good example of that was the like Las Vegas Open, and like I think Paul and Adam did a stellar job, but like I literally like they had to talk, they had to fill so much time with their conversation, like hours and hours and hours of like commentary, and it's like sometimes I just want to hear the players talk, but in 40K it's actually not that interesting either. Like there is no good answer because that's not that interesting either.
Yeah, because if you get a player like Jeff Robinson who doesn't want to say anything ever because he's trying his hardest to not give away anything to his opponent, right? Then you're not going to have anything.
Yeah.
Or you're going to get two chatty Cathys who don't know what they're doing, because they're spending their whole time playing.
Right.
Yeah, stream multiple tables would be an answer, I suppose.
I miss the battle reports where there was like, as an old fantasy player, where there was like squares and then there's arrows and explosions. Like, and I could flip through the whole battle report in like 30 seconds because I'd be like, turn one, these arrows went here and these explosions happened, and then these units moved here, and then like, hey, 6 pages done. Don't even have to read the thing. I could just watch, see how the squares like progressed up the table. Like that's my perfect battle report.
I think we were talking a while ago about also. I was just thinking about this really quick. Talking about like judging and like consistency. Corvus Bell does a really good job. Infinity, that game, they do. They have like their ITS system, and they actually have like you have to be like a judge that like passes like their system in order to like become a judge for their events.
Yeah.
Do you think
Magic the Gathering used to do that too, right? Like Magic the Gathering had, but they wouldn't pay really. They just had like a system to qualify. And I think getting back to Jim's earlier point, which is like, yes, obviously I think that if you want professional judging, then the professional judges have to be like compensated, paid, bring them in. I definitely probably wouldn't be one of those like have tournament will travel guys, just because of the way my work schedule is, and like I got 2 young kids, and like I really like to be around for like their ballet stuff and their baseball and things. But I think that if you want to get to the point where judging at the biggest events is more consistent, there either needs to be like an advisory body of judges, or there needs to be specific judges who travel to the events to make sure everything is the same, right?
I think I had a pretty long rant on like, and this kind of maybe is a good segue into the next segment, which I know obviously the relationship between FLG and GW has been, and the ITC has been a fairly like big, like they've done a huge amount for the circuit, like the FLG and with the ITC. I think people underestimate how they almost single-handedly kept the game alive for probably some time. In a lot of ways, maybe not in Europe where they play a whole different version of Warhammer, but in North America anyways. But one of the things that obviously Reese mentioned recently was that as part of their kind of forward partnerships or movement, FLG was not going to put out any more ITC facts. That was something that I remember polls in like 7th edition or 6th edition, where they're like, it was like, how many Wraith Knights should armies be allowed? How many Knights should armies be allowed? What rule should we use for D weapons? Like there's all sorts of polls that FLG would run in order to like help basically manage the game, because GW had let it get totally out of control. And I know that's something that's like basic.
Well, we made FAQs at one point.
Yeah,
Oh
Like
yeah.
we had the official ITC FAQ that we put out at one point,
Right.
like because nobody else was, and now the GW's come back in and is like, we're going to do these things. Then now that's taking a back seat.
Right, and the WTC does that. They have an FAQ that I think a lot of the questions are probably. It's like I think they err on the side of over answering. Like I read through the FAQ and I'm like, man, I've never even heard of some of these issues ever, right? And I think I think there is, but like I guess kind of going to the whole point of like having that body with rules, it's like I think the issue isn't actually the community. I think the issue is GW, because at the end of the day, I know, talking to like Tom and Neil and some of the judges from the US, like there are mechanisms for that feedback getting to Games Workshop, and a lot of times they just choose to not listen. They're just like there's how many people blamed the playtesters on Iron Hands? Like almost everyone. Like, and it's like, you know what? Maybe some of the playtesters didn't say anything, but I bet you a lot of them were like, yo, this is the fact that like anyone the fact that within like 6 seconds of reading it, you're like, this is broken. Even someone that was like mediocre, it's not like the playtest, like it got by all the playtesters. So there must have been this.
Well, maybe all the playtesters just own Space Marines, Jim.
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. But I guess my point is like,
where's my tinfoil hat?
What do you think the way forward is to and I'm hoping people like Mike can maybe push the elephant in this sense. But like, I think there is a big issue between the lack of clear and thorough FAQs and clear and thorough like judging, and like this is all part of a bigger problem, which is that like the competitive scene needs certain things, like certain basics, and we just don't get them. And so the question is like, who should we turn to? Should we just go without, or do we need to kind of take matters in our own hands, like the ITC did, like FLG did, like the WTC does, and do that stuff? Do you think that's the way forward, or do you think this idea where like if GW doesn't, like, I was actually shocked how fast people went from we're going to use our own missions, our own facts, to what GW puts out as gospel. That was like, it felt like between all the different people um, like Nova, Adepticon, and LVO were like, we're all going to use GW missions for 2020. This was like right before COVID. For 9th edition anyways. That turn, it was like overnight. People went from like, we only want to play ITC, to like Games Workshop rule book missions are God, so quickly. And that was very shocking to me, because I thought there'd be like a way bigger fight to do that. So I don't know where I'm going with this.
I think that there might have been a certain amount of GW made sure that the big ones were going to do with their missions, right? And as soon as that happened, then that was that.
Yeah.
Like, and I'm not privy to any of those conversations, so I don't know. But it definitely feels like the fact that you had Nova, Adepticon, ITC, and like the big three with their own mission sets basically all go, yeah, we're going to adopt this and that's that. That very much seems like, okay, well, they were definitely in on some type of discussion, right?
Yeah.
Whether they were in on helping to create the missions, whether they were in on something with Games Workshop in other ways, where now the deal was, okay, you're going to use these missions, right? And they all went, sure. And like I said, I don't know, but that's pretty clear that like, because as soon as they came out, all those groups said at the same time, we're using these missions, not our own homebrew missions anymore. Now, I don't think that was the wrong decision. I definitely think that's the right decision, because I was always an advocate for the missions should be more varied. Like, I did not like that the ITC just had 6.
Yeah.
I was always an advocate when I helped create those missions that we should have like 12 or more, right? But that's hard to do. Like, honestly, having helped make those missions multiple times, that's very difficult. But I also was always an advocate for there should just be the single set, so that players going to events can always prepare for the events, and that's a more even competitive playing field. I am not the hugest fan of the 9th edition missions, but I do like that we are all playing the same missions, and that I can go to any event in the United States or internationally. I'm not going to travel internationally for 40K. I'm going to travel internationally. I'm going to go as a tourist for other reasons. But
yes, thank you. Yes.
But if I was to travel anywhere to play 40K, at least I would know exactly what I would need to be playing, right? And I think that's a big deal. But yeah, there's definitely hurdles that need to be addressed, and part of the problem is that we had a whole year where we couldn't.
Right.
there could be no growth. There was no growth last year, and I know people are like, "Well, in America, you guys couldn't play, but other places could play." Sure, that's fine. I get it. Like other places handled COVID better. I get it. Point taken. But overall, in 2020, there was not enough games being played places for there to be any real growth in any respect other than, well, here's more rules.
Yeah.
Right? There was no way to be like, well, how should we handle these events and these situations? And FAQs need to be for these things. And are these missions actually balanced or are they not? And have we actually been able to test them fully or not?
Yeah.
So I think that there's a lot of stuff that we'll see as we go into the next season,
Mm-hmm.
or this season, I should say, and through the and into the next one, where we
Yeah.
see a lot of stuff getting hashed out like this, because it's the natural course of events. It's going to have to happen,
Right.
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, Whatever the relationships are between GW and the major independent tournaments will have to be hashed out, figured out, negotiated, whatever the case may be, so that you can have these types of more cohesive rulings,
Mm-hmm.
judging, missions, that kind of stuff.
Okay.
Yeah.
And John, I just want to be mindful of your time, but just before you go, what do you,
Sure.
what do you kind of, two quick questions. First one, do you find your students harder to deal with or 40K players?
40K players.
And second, what do
Duh.
obviously this year you mentioned like not much has been played last year. I think this year is still not going to be a very fruitful year when it comes to events. So, but like, what are you looking forward
Yeah.
to most for the rest of the year as far as like gaming, or like is it getting back to events? Is it like maybe LVO 2022? Like, what are the things that you're kind of
Yeah.
what are the things you're looking forward to that are keeping you kind of going and sane and engaged in the hobby?
So locally, we've been able to play more here in Pasadena.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we've been able to get together in a small group to be able to do our battle reports for TFG Radio, and then on the 10th of the 10th of April, we're actually going to have our first tournament for the first time in over a year.
Nice.
Like the last time we
Very
had a
jealous.
tournament in Pasadena was February,
Whew.
which I played in. Actually, I played in the very last tournament we had here in Pasadena last February, a whole February ago. So that I'm looking forward to. But I'm sure things will get canceled that were supposed to happen, that kind of stuff. I am looking forward to being able to have the next Las Vegas Open.
Yeah.
I think that
Nice.
will definitely happen.
Mm-hmm.
I am looking forward to be there, and judge and drink when I'm done judging copiously.
Not
Or
before though.
drink while
Not one
judging.
drop before
Yeah.
though.
I will no, I do. I will have a beer or whatever while we're doing it, or like I'll have I'll have a vodka Red Bull in the morning or something. But like, yeah, I don't drink copiously throughout the day because that's not conducive to being a good judge. But like, I went out the night before. I probably need a little something in the morning to get over the hangover before I start to make decisions, that kind of stuff. But yeah, the drinking happens afterwards at the pub crawl.
Yeah,
So I'm looking forward to the pub
I'm
crawl.
hoping to be there. Like I just the way things are going up here, like our borders have been closed for almost a year, and even if like yeah, I'm just hoping I can come to America at some point and play at a 40K event like this calendar year. I'll be very happy if that is possible because it's like even after even by the end of summer, I am very doubtful it's going to be like free easy travel, right? Like I think still will be lots of
Yeah.
bears. All right. Well, John, I really appreciate you coming on. I think you did
Thanks for having me.
change my mind a little bit on my hardcore judging stances. Where can people find you online besides? Yeah, where can people find you?
So on Facebook, there's the Salty John page, which is mostly memes. So if you like memes, that's where you go. If you don't like memes and you have a very soft sense of humor, don't follow that page. TFG Radio also has a Facebook page, and tfgradio.com, their YouTube page. That's where I put up. In fact, I just put up a battle report between my Space Wolves and Danny's triple Dimakaran pyramid list. So if you're interested in seeing how badly triple Dimakarans can table my army, go watch that battle report.
See, the nice thing about triple diamond cranes, you don't even need 11 minutes. I opened the battle report. I watched like the first minute, and it was like, oh, the diamond cranes like had wiped out like all your army already, and I was like, all right, I need to watch the
Yep.
rest. Pretty
Yep.
sure the diamond cranes win.
Yep.
All right,
Yeah.
Nice.
that's awesome. And yeah, so thanks so much for coming on. For those of you that
Yeah.
are tuning in, please make sure to like and subscribe to the video on YouTube and Twitch. And next week we have Bobby Clark on from Red Eagle Studios. He's a Golden Demon winner and studio painter. and so we're going to be talking about some of the charity work he does, how you got into commission painting. So make sure to tune in for that episode. Any final shout outs, David? Any final thoughts?
What? Oh, yeah. I am here, guys. Just heads up. Yeah. Hey, hi, guys. Anyways, are we going to talk about books we read?
No, John's got to go. If you want to stick on and continue, we can have our typhus conversation, but I think we're going to probably wrap up here.
John, I got a question for you. You mentioned you're a Space Wolf player. Sorry, we talk a lot about being a super judge, but on the actual you love the hobby part of things, other than being a Space Wolf player, like what's your jam?
Space Wolves, I like Salamanders. I'm a huge Salamanders fan.
Yes, me too.
Nice.
Imperial Knights. When it comes to the bad guys, quote unquote bad guys, I always liked the Word Bearers until the Lorgar book came out, and then I was like, I don't really like these guys anymore.
Like the Primarch series Lorgar book?
No, what was his? Yeah, First Heretic. When First Heretic came out, I was like, man, Lorgar is kind of a mealy mouthed wuss. I don't know if I really like this guy.
Yeah, we shouldn't read the Lorgar book then.
No. I mean, I really love, when it comes to Warhammer, I really love the Horus Heresy books.
We'll have to.
I read them all. I love them all.
Well, I don't know if you're caught up, but we'll have to get you back on to talk spoilers, because I'm very I'm like all caught up, and I'm like, hey, when's the next one? So I'm very into that as well. So
if you want to have me back to talk about lore anytime you want, I'll definitely come back to do that.
Sounds good, John. All right, thanks everyone for tuning in, and have a good rest of the week, and stay safe. Bye bye.